working out on the bench in the lab. Yeah. Standard. Well, standard transmissions. This reminds me. Yesterday, Saturday, I was at the Film Center here in Philadelphia. I got to see Two Lane Blacktop on the big screen. It's the first time that I've ever seen the movie in a theater. I've seen it many, many times. It's one of my favorite films. But to see it in a theater with an audience was interesting. I do think that I was probably one of the few people in the audience who really knew the film. I think a lot of people who were in there were there seeing it for the first time, or maybe hadn't really known what to expect. But it was made in 1971 is when it came out. Gary Kurtz was producer before Star Wars. It's a road film, but it's also sort of a spaghetti western in a weird way. There's a lot in common with the Italian westerns, like the Sergio Leone films. But instead of gunfights and duels, it's about this group of people traveling cross country, doing illegal street races and racing for a living. And it's about these two young guys who are in this 55 Chevy Gasser. That's what it's called, a Gasser. 4-speed custom drag racer.
That Plymouth had a Hemi with a torque pipe.
Built specifically for street racing. And they're racing their way across country, winning and losing races, and basically making the money, shutting other racers down in all these little burgs, and all of the little scuffles they get into along the way. And on their heels is a guy who's suffering, apparently by all accounts, a midlife crisis, and has bought his own factory-built muscle car, and thinks that he can show the kids something new. And the kids in the Chevy are pretty much just ignoring him. And the midlife crisis guy is played by Warren Oates, a veteran actor who does a great job in a very complicated role. And the two kids are James Taylor, right, in his acting debut, and Dennis Wilson, the drummer from the Beach Boys. The only real surfer in the Beach Boys. Wilson is the mechanic and Taylor is the driver. And nobody has any names. That's one of the things. This is why it's like a spaghetti western. The characters don't have names. There's this intrigue from town to town. They have a foil which is following them around. The guy in the GTO, Warren Oates, is following them around. They run into all kinds of different characters. They have all kinds of different adventures and scrapes and stuff. But it's sort of like a road trip western. But it's also an analog about America at the time, because much like films like Easy Rider, where they're really trying to travel across country and they're really just trying to do their own thing and running into the culture at the time. But the thing about the movie that's really makes it appealing are the cars. Lots of cars, really great cars. And the star of the film is the Gasser itself, which there was, I guess, within the last couple years, Jay Leno, he has got this Jay Leno's Garage. He did a show about that car, the original car in the film, and got James Taylor to drive it again. Because in the film, and this is what comes out in the Jay Leno interview, because I really didn't know until I saw the Jay Leno interview with James Taylor, that James Taylor really did a lot of the driving, or most of the driving in the film. And a lot of it is done from the perspective of having the camera in the back seat, showing James Taylor behind the wheel of the car, doing drag racing. I don't know if he did all of the high-speed stuff, because there are some things that were done on real drag strips and stuff, and they almost certainly probably had a professional driver do that. But he said in the interview that he drove the car a lot, and he spent a lot of time racing the car. He got to know the car very well. And the realism in the film, because there's no trailer, where the typical thing they do in Hollywood films is if there's a lot of driving in it, they'll put the car on a trailer, and then they'll drive the trailer around, and the actors will act like they're driving the car. But there was none of that in Two Lane Blacktop. It was all done with real cars, and the actors do their own driving. You know, it's just like the Gumball Rally, which is another one of my favorites, and it was for the same reason that the actors did all their own driving, and it just makes a film that much more important. And the idea that James Taylor, one of my favorite artists, and he's a really good actor in the film, really pulls off the character of the driver. It was a really cool experience to see it on the big screen. Digitally projected, I really wish I could have seen it on film, but I doubt there's any really good 35mm prints of that film in existence. If they are, they're probably in private collections. But Two Lane Blacktop, one of my favorites. I having seen it yesterday, I'm still thinking about it, and I probably will want to get a 4K copy now so that I could watch it again soon, because there were things in it that I was catching that I hadn't seen before that I want to go back and get. But the dynamic of that film is very important. The most underrated character of the film is the girl, the hippie girl that they pick up along the way, who has probably like the most difficult to define role, because she's not a principal character. She's sort of a hangers-on, but she represents the counterculture. And I really wouldn't have appreciated that character as much as after I read the Joan Didion book, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, where there's a chapter in that book where Didion writes about the kids in San Francisco in the late 60s who just, you know, are kind of living on the verge of homelessness, and all the runaways, and the reality of the hippie kids who, you know, at the time were really kids. Were, you know, she discovered that, you know, 14, 15-year-olds were running away from homes, you know, conservative homes all over the country, and hitchhiking their way to the West Coast and find themselves in San Francisco. And these are literally kids who are starving and being sick and getting wasted and trying to avoid the cops, and all the realities that were in the Joan Didion book about, like, the reality of the hippie culture that is totally elusive to anyone who only discovers it through movies and television shows. But the reality of that culture is really expressed in that character, the girl in Two Lane Blacktop, because she's a runaway, and you don't know what she's running from, but she's just always like leaving. She's just going somewhere, and it doesn't seem to matter how she gets there or who takes her there, but she's headed somewhere away. And she kind of embodies a lot of the realities of the culture of the time. Which, again, I wouldn't have appreciated the accuracy of that character until I read the Joan Didion chapter, what the reality of those runaways was really all about. And it made me wonder, you know, how many of those kids survived the 60s or the early 70s? You know, those thousands of kids that ended up making up the Haight-Ashbury crowd, homeless and starving and sick. How many of them lived into adulthood? You know, how many of them were really around to tell the tale? I do wonder. I really do wonder. But Two Lane Blacktop, if you haven't seen it, you might wanna. It's one of my favorites. James Taylor on Paul McCartney's Musician's Tribute. Well, James Taylor was the very first artist to be signed to Apple Records, when the Beatles created Apple Corps. It was a multimedia company. It was supposed to be films, records, stuff like that. And Apple Records, the first artist other than the Beatles that was on Apple Records was James Taylor. He was the first one to be signed. Fun fact. That's where I work. In the lab. berserk. In my lab, it's where I work. It's what you're watching. Friend love. It's what I'm doing. Working at the bench again.